Hello, everyone. I think we're going to get started. Nice to see some of our studio here, maybe our whole studio, I guess. So it is my honor today to introduce to everyone who hasn't met our speaker and my co-teacher this semester, Gary Bates. In the past 4 months, I've learned a thing or two about Gary. For example, Gary is hardcore. He tirelessly pushes himself for constant progress and reinvention, and he will never be content to rest on his laurels. His favorite TV shows are Alone and Shark Tank. For those wondering after last week's lecture, he is a Virgo. But above all, I think he is an optimist who is continuously searching for ways to do more and do better because he believes in the power of architecture to make positive change. His bio reads as a testament to these mentalities. Originally from Delaware, Gary Bates left the United States in 1992 with little more than a folio of hand-developed photographs and a distaste for what he knew to be architectural education. Following a year at Daniel Liebeskin's office working on the Jewish Museum in Berlin, and after what I'm told was an epic difference of opinion, Gary cold-called Rem Koolhaas and with barely an interview, landed a job at OMA in 1993. This, of course, was just in time for the meteoric rise of the firm and the beginning of a golden period of their work. With contributions to the firm's core canon, including the Educatorium, Jusu Library, and a number of projects during his time as principal of the Asian desk, Gary had already made a mark on architectural discourse when he left for Norway to start Space Group with Gru Bonismo, in 1999. Over the next 20 years, while running Space Group, Gary also developed his own progressive ethos on the architecture industry, focusing not simply on becoming the head of a single firm's production hierarchy, but instead embracing an almost startup-like mentality, incubating spin-off businesses and empowering others to entrepreneurship along the way. In this latest chapter of his life, at the helm of his New York City-based firm MakeMake, Gary brings this richness of perspective, multiplicity of experiences, and innovative drive back to the United States. And he is already quite in demand. Since his return, he has held teaching positions at Syracuse, Columbia, and now here at Cornell, where we are fortunate to learn from his experience this semester as the Gensler visiting critic. And with that, I will turn it over for imparted wisdom from my colleague, and dare I say friend, Gary Bates.
Hi. Is that working? Microphone? Okay. I just wanted to sit and listen to that. Thank you. You could continue. And the dates are almost right. Pretty close. I won't correct them. No, they were close. Thanks. It's really grateful to be here. Grateful to be at Gensler. Really happy to see so many students here today. I hope that's. I hope you don't regret it. I am going to talk. There were some personal stories. I'm going to talk both about work we've done and also the new chapter of what we're doing together with Anna Bates sitting here. That's why I'm so nervous. And you know, it has been a kind of really interesting journey. I've been away for 30 years. I'm kind of not a citizen anymore. I came back to the United States with a passport and a social security card. And it's a weird place to be when you don't understand the rules anymore. And I never knew the rules, never wrote a check, didn't have credit cards, didn't know I needed that, didn't know what the 40-to-1 ratio was, didn't know how to get an apartment, didn't understand what 30, 60, 3,000, 6,000, healthcare, gold, kind of all those terminologies meant, didn't understand the relationships to property. And all those things were kind of great because I came from a place that was so horizontal in terms of governance and horizontal in terms of social equity. But I have to say, not as horizontal as you may think. So coming back, and a lot of people ask me, why did you come back? I came back to kind of be part of the kind of, I think what's going on here now is incredibly interesting. I think what's going on in architecture school is radically different than what I experienced going to architecture school. The subjects that are kind of being discussed and the platform and the voice that you guys have, I think is really interesting. So I want to start a little bit with the title, and it's related to a lecture that I gave, a commencement speech about range. And I'm going to read a little bit. I kind of rewrote it specifically for you and to think about some of these ideas. We are intellectuals and technicians, artists and engineers, social anthropologists and policymakers, we oscillate between disciplines and professional areas of practice. The complexity of what we do often obfuscates the simplicity of it. Moreover, what we do is changing, especially as we architects respond to the many challenges that confronts the world today. And perhaps the most notable change is the shift that is occurring in architecture as a discipline and a profession from a practice where the architect is concerned mostly with building to one where the architect is a facilitator of ideas, methods of approaching the world. Architecture school is about architecture. Architecture school is a culture that binds this group of people together, these students and faculty and staff together. It's a culture that enables them to see through a different lens, an equitable one, a spatial one, a collective one. It's a culture that educates us to appreciate and make use of unexpected relationships, connections within the frame of making. Architects are makers. Thus the name of my new company, Make, and epizeuxis, which I'll tell you more about later. We make relationships, we make frameworks for communications, we make equitable space, low threshold space that engenders the diversity that releases our humanity. And through this process, we provide access. Access is a really important word for this conversation. To conversations, access to information, access to ways of seeing and reading people, space, conditions, and ideas. Now, if we delaminate for a moment our visual memory of space and place and consider what do spaces do for you, what do they give you, how do they enable you, this is what we do. We enable spaces and places to communicate within life, to enliven and to animate what is known as well as what is unpredictable and unknown. Architecture facilitates our immersion into the experience of space, and the more committed we are to this, the more powerful the experience becomes. My younger self was a combination of overeducated and insecure. I wanted to be something that was constantly a moving target. Every time I thought I knew what architecture was, I discovered it was something else. I saw myself as a generalist in a specialist field and a specialist in a general field. We are experts in equitable communities, industrial design, new materials, coding, environmental strategies, decolonization, cultural geography, circular economies, and systems thinking and design. And as complicated as it all sounds, it's built around one simple idea, and that idea is listening. Listening is a reciprocal, connective, and incredibly virtuous affair. I'm fanatical about this idea of range, investigating conceptual relationships between seemingly unrelated ideas and environments and the mechanisms inside of them. Navigating uncertainty, asking questions for problems that we didn't know existed. Not architecture is solution. Embracing ambiguity and delighting in details, the power of 10. And for all the students, architecture is slow. One of the projects I'll show tonight, which is not true because I took it away, took me 15 years to build from the winning competition until the first boat disembarked from the ferry terminal. In many ways, architecture should be slow. Slow is inclusive, slow is reflective, slow is adding value throughout, slow is iterative. School, on the other hand, is fast. And the speed, frankly, is intoxicating. As a teacher, it's intoxicating. As a student, it's intoxicating. A speed that is almost impossible to replicate outside of this environment. And you need to be aware of that. You need to be prepared for that. This elaborate consolidation of intelligence and potential I have here is such a unique opportunity. The slowness of architecture gives us the latitude to translate our ambitions into a conversation. A conversation that may translate itself, if we're fortunate, into an experience. And an experience that may be understood as architecture. And this takes time. So, that's about range. This is the longest lecture I've ever made. You should really brace yourself and get whatever stimulants you may need to get through it. Partly because I don't know if I'll ever be invited back, and I'm not sure how many more bus rides I can survive. So either I have to move here, which is not outside of the question, I assume you guys are familiar with relational aesthetics. What's that? Ah, okay, cool, thank you. As Nicholas Boryat, author of Relational Aesthetics, describes, this world consists not only of things, signs, and forms. This world is held together by interpersonal relations that form the ultimate source and object of inspiration and creative work. That's the second part of what this lecture is about. Those interpersonal relations, and I'll tell you a lot of stories. I'm not going to show you every project in its entirety. I'm going to show you pieces of project, and each of those pieces have a story. First, a side note. This is for the teachers now. In my 30 years as an architect, I've done 40 competitions. I've invested approximately 5.7 million euros, which right now, unfortunately, is about $5.7 million. We've had an income on that 5.7 million investment of about 1 million euros. That means I've invested approximately 4.7 million euros in competitions. Just want to throw that out there. This is research and development. So I have a theory in my office, it's called 60-40. 60 is the percent we need in order to be level, in order to pay our bills, to pay our rent, to pay our staff. That's a 60. The 40, that's either more profit or it's research. That's the 40. So 60-40 is the relative split between billable and non-billable hours necessary to be financially positive. In the current risk-averse financial market, no ideas are categorized as slow, costly, threatening. Consumed by this conundrum, a majority of our energy is expended on achieving the 60 baseline. Why invest in an increasingly redundant service? I believe that the 40 is actually the interesting part. It's the interesting number in the equation that represents a massive effort invested to generate ideas, the sweat equity forming the platform for the discourse of architecture. We do it invisibly and for our own, important note here, we do it for our own gratification. We inject it when no one is looking. Within the 40, the visions of our collective intelligence are conceived and explored. We have to focus on the 40. The front line for our research is through competitions. Competitions motivate us to challenge the status quo and question everything and exhaust possibilities and surprise ourselves. The beauty of competition is that it's bare performance. It's a platform where we spend ridiculous amounts of energy and time, ridiculous amounts of money to do exactly what we want. That's why we do them. And it's the freedom that this allows us to evolve. And without evolution, our profession becomes completely banal. Competition is a return to speculation. That is the strength of our discipline, our greatest capital, the capital of ideas. Our primary motivation in competition is not to build. It's not a form of acquisition, but rather it's to innovate. It's a polemical situation. You go to school for 7 years, you start to practice architecture, then it takes another 7 years to become an architect, the architect that you think you should become. And that time the dilemma is simple. You're kind of 14 years into the game, and you want to know, how do you refresh yourself without stagnation? How do we reinvent ourselves? Competitions provide that opportunity. So that's the third part. Fourth part, and then I'm just going to show you a bunch of cool stuff. I hope you think it's cool. This is about Make, which is a switch. Emma talked about it, talked about our shift into an increasingly entrepreneurial mindset. I think architects are great facilitators of a conversation. We're not great entrepreneurs, not yet. We've talked for years about multidisciplinary as a justification of we're all working together. As our profession becomes increasingly diluted, back to the notion of range. This idea of the generalist is what I'm kind of implicating in that story about range, that allows us to do an immense amount of interface and conversation. Make was a new idea. It includes the thinking that we built up over 30 years in Norway. It includes another 20 years of innovation in Riga, and bringing those ideas together to look at how we can look at architecture from the perspective of making, which includes making access, making processes, making relationships, making interconnections, making space, making opportunities. Okay, so all you need to know about the lecture are these three things. This is what the founding pillars of Make are. 30 years, and I allow myself to use a word like wisdom. It was really discussed, like, can we use that word? Well, after 30 years, I hope I can use that word, otherwise that 4.7 million euros was wasted. Adaptability, agency, circularity, partnership, entrepreneurship. Disruption is the second part of the work. Activism, guerrilla tactics, solving the impossible, taking risks, and agenda. And humanity, obviously the first pillar. That's what it comes down to. We're a human-to-human business. Collective responsibility, community, relationships, horizontal hierarchies, social equity. So everything you're going to see, these are all the projects you're going to see. It's not that many. It's 12 projects. And that graph kind of shows you how they gravitate. In each project, you'll see, before I start, in which spectrum that project is gravitating and how we kind of built the idea within the work. The hotel, I'm not going to show you the hotel, but I'm going to show you parts of the hotel. As you see, it's gravitating towards wisdom, which relates to the building, but of course, it navigates humanity and disruption. We built a hotel. The hotel is a atrium hotel. No one builds an atrium hotel anymore because you want double-loaded corridors, because double-loaded corridors are much more efficient. Well, we didn't do that. We wanted to have that space that was the space for people that are occupied. It was for free, the space for people who live in the city. So we created that space. And within that space, we designed everything. The contractor, the GC, tried to get rid of us, understood he couldn't, and fortunately then embraced us and allowed us to design the facades. I can't tell you how difficult this is. The facades don't look like this. This is our study in the facades. If you're ever doing, I really love this part of if you see how the circles move into squares before they move back into circles again. We spent 1 year on this section. 1 year. This is 1 year of work here above me of how we could make that transition without going through the square. And we did manage it, but she quit immediately afterwards, which then gave us this. That's our facade. Looks like this when it's installed. Each one of those clouds is a room, which looks like this. In my original lecture, I have 450 slides that show you each room, but I thought to spare you that. So there's a few rooms and the views from those rooms. I had a photographer walk around actually one floor of the building and take every room from the same position. The carpets we designed for each space. This is a chandelier. We designed 9 chandeliers. Each chandelier was 3 meters or 4 meters by 4 meter diameter. When we first started to work with LEDs, the chandelier looks like this when it's installed. This is it about to be raised into position. This is the final product. The acoustic wall, they gave us a budget. It was almost nothing, so we had to kind of, that's how we built trust. They put a budget and they said, this is what we're going to do. Here's the money we're planning to spend. If you can do something for that money, then we'll let you kind of design it. So now you see the chandelier with the acoustic walls in the conference facility. The bathroom, we really wanted to walk in the bathroom and see the view, so we created this mirror. This is where the trust is at the maximum, as you can imagine. This is not necessary for the project, but something we did on the top floor, under construction many years ago, but I'm trying not to show any renderings and trying to show lots of construction for you guys as they're installing it. The hotel is split into 2 atriums. One is for the conference facility, one is for the public. and those two meet at a pinch point. The facades of the lobby with kind of views from the corridors back into the lobby space of the atrium. Cats, beautiful art piece. This is the lobby from seen from one of the bridges with the views that I described when it's finished. The patterns in the floor were also designed, how the stone was laid. This is the level of kind of articulation and detail that we went into to realize this project. This is a photograph, not a collage, but it looks like a collage. The facade are folded pieces of metal that create actually a swarm of birds, each one hand folded. If you take away the EL, it says hot. This is now finished, the view for the bridge. That's the pinch point that connects the two lobbies. So that's connecting the lobby of the hotel to the lobby of the guest. Now we're standing, the lobby of the conference, the lobby of the hotel. Pretty good view. So, stepping back, one of the first projects that we did in the Varner House, it's actually a project from 2003, which I think I've almost never lectured about. It's a private house. A really interesting condition with the house. A 30-year-old man and his wife had a beautiful property by the waterfront facing north. Sun is everything in Norway when you live that far north. So how do you orient a house that actually gets light from the south but looks to the sea on the north? But more importantly than that, and I'm being completely transparent and honest, and afterwards we can have a conversation about it, he was ridiculously wealthy. And the reason I'm saying that is not because, okay, you can show us the house, and of course the guy's very rich. The reason I'm saying is that, back to disruption, we forced him then into situations to take social responsibility. And that was everything from using the shipping industry, creating a compact steel roof and insulation blown into it, which is far more expensive than a traditional construction, making every column was made to reduce the amount of material rather than repeating the number of columns, but there's more work to make every column different and unique because every span has different responsibilities. To collecting water, I went to all the engineers, mechanical engineers, and they said, well, we've never done that in Norway before. And he's asking, why do I need to do that? And I'm saying, you need to do it to set a precedence that this is how we're going to do things in the future. And he bought into those logics. The house is not big. It's only, it's big for me, but it's considering the house he could have, considering his brothers who live next to him, who live in McMansions. This house is about, I think it's about 4,500 square feet or so. Looks like this. In case you guessed already, that's an octopus on the facade to create some privacy. The courtyard there is for his bedroom. The entrance is through that hole. So you actually enter the house in the middle and penetrate down in the hole. I don't know if I have a pointer on this thing. I keep wanting it though. The library on the right side. The facade opens in the library. The fireplace rotates to face the outside. I'm standing on the street. The water is in front of me. The house is two terrains. Top one opens to the street. The bottom one opens to the view. The intersection is in the middle where this bullet hole is that connects those two and brings sunlight into the living space. The kitchen is above, and the roof you'll see here. There's the structure. What you see is flat steel, is a steel cassette with blown insulation, a welded steel cassette using a Z profile inside. What you see is beams is steel beams. Here it is being installed. Here's the entrance of the bullet hole. That's me with hair on the left. Here's the view to the sea, the sun as it kind of comes, so that opening in those two directions navigated by that hole. So you have three entries to the house. Entry number one is there you see on the left. Entry number two is down that stair and enters into the central space. And entrance number three is under this grass. You actually drive your car into the mountain. And you actually have the mountain on the side, and you can enter straight into the living space. Now the project manager said, it's completely not possible to expose the stone. I'm gonna have a picture of it here. I said it is, he said it's not, I said it is. We said get a second opinion, you got a second opinion, it's not. I said it is, he said it's not. It was. They were both friends of his. They didn't want to do it. I founded a neutral party. We built it. That's where wisdom and disruption meet each other. And we're able to kind of expose the excavation. These steel walls are 55 millimeters thick. They have concrete in between them. They serve multiple functions. They're painted with blackboard paint, so the children have this amazing wall that they draw on. The concrete supports these 55 millimeter thick walls support the floor slab above. It's metal, so it's magnetic. So it's a composite structure. So already in 2003, we started to work with composite structures to see how metal and steel could work together. So this is a view. My office is saying, why are you showing construction photos when it's built? Where are all the beautiful photos? I said, I'm not going to show any beautiful photos tonight. Okay, so this is the kids' room. It's using a special textile, which they use in speed skiing, which is both insulating but also elastic. So the kids enter into these tents. The father's making drawings on the wall there, as you see. So that's an example of one space. The view, there's a fireplace in the middle of that view that's coming, which has fire glass, so you see through the fire into the forest. The forest fire is there. Here's the roof being slid in on rails before it's welded together. So this was slid in to cover the kitchen, which is here. The kitchen, he wants to have an overview, so there's a cabin inside the house, which is this wooden cabin. The kitchen is on the roof of the wooden cabin. There's the wooden cabin to the right. There's the stair inside going up to the kitchen, the stair outside coming into the living space. The stair to the library, cantilevering from one side with a glass floor and heated glass next to you, which you see here. His helmet says welding machine on it. This guy's apparently the best welder that they had. The entry, so in that little wedge in the left there behind the glass is where you come from the garage. So you come from the garage, you come in here, you come down, you come in here, you go into the kitchen, or through the library that you see on the left there. And it creates this interesting inside-outside connection. Here's the entry to the garage. It's just an open carport. The library. So the house looks like this. Right. Also, pre-space group, when we were just sitting at home drawing. This is the project together that Toyo Ito made a master plan for Groningen for a project called the Blue Moon. He invited a number of architects to connect. Let's say they were going to develop something called the Europa Park, which is outside the city. And they wanted to connect infill projects, which they called impossible kind of infills in the city. And he wanted to draw a connection between them based on this diagram. Inner city housing, the Europa Park, and the moon. So we made two projects. We made a house in the city, infill. The first project we've actually, I think, ever built on our own, let's say, and the park. This is the house. The house is using a PTFE facade with a wooden structure. The idea of the house is that he wanted to invert the public program and the private program. So actually there's a swimming pool on the roof with a kindergarten, kind of small kindergarten space, and a living space on the first two floors. So you have 2 floors of living and 2 floors of public space with a pool on the roof, a very small pool. So actually, the entrance on the left, this tall piece of glass, is a staircase that winds through the project and brings you to the roof. And on the left, which you don't see in the image here, is where the person living in the house lives. This is the pool, which hangs down into the space below. It looks like this when it's finished, with the textile facades that open. There are the 2 entrances, the public entrance wrapping the private entrance. There's also a combination of glass with netting, just PTFE, and just glass. So we felt fortunate to have built that. The project in Europa Park was interesting. It was a coal wall. I think it was a 180-meter long coal wall. This is our first kind of really hardcore adaptive reuse projects. We had 2 sides of the wall, which we wanted to navigate. On the one side, relating to the moon, we created this trampoline garden. The interesting thing about the trampoline garden is exactly what you see in the picture. It became a public space where people stood around, usually the parents. And the kids are jumping in the middle, and these parents who don't know each other are facing each other and starting a conversation. If you were lucky, you could jump and see over the wall. I never managed that. That's my son in the middle. So you can see how long ago it was, because he's 22 years old now. And here's a group of people who don't know each other in the middle of this field, jumping on a trampoline. And that was me, not able to jump on a trampoline, and my other son coming to show me. And inside the wall is a gallery space. In the gallery space, so this is the other side of the wall where we made a bar. The bar, we were all about temporality. So the bar was you recycling the tracks that were already there. Then we found a company that could give us a giant block of ice. And we said, the bar will last as long as this block of ice lasts. And so they filled the bar with drinks, filled the ice block with drinks, and waited for it to disintegrate and kind of go back into the canal. Inside the bar, we filled it with sand. And that sand created a number of different topographies that brought us closer and further away from the structure. And a number of openings to introduce natural light where we could have natural light. So it looks like this, the space. All right. Just staying in the historical work, this is a bar in Rotterdam. One of the first bars we did, what I wanted to, I was afraid of that. This is the communications that I had with the owner of the bar. So the whole project can be read. These are actually back in the day when we're only using text messages. So this is me and the owner kind of texting each other, and some of the things he's saying, translucent, reflective, and with metallic structure in it. As a strategy for the changing atmospheres on the first floor, we are considering, I can't remember what, I think there were circular columns of light. Lighting is crucial, and some definitions of that in our sketches. And that's like the combination. So we just communicated with SMS and drawings, and that's how we got all the feedback on the project. So the project looks like this, sorry. It was a bar that we did, built by Vincent de Rijk, a kind of amazing, all the most amazing models you've ever seen from OMA were built by Vincent de Rijk. He's exhibited at MoMA, has this incredible materiality. This is a 7-meter long resin bar, kind of in one piece. So, all right. Switching context, and now, sorry, you kind of always have to, in this world approaching humanity, we were given an assignment to look at an old military, so Norway has mountains. Not all of those mountains are full with stone and rock. Some of them are filled with military people who are watching us. This is one of those mountains. There's an elevator inside the mountain. There's old listening rooms inside the mountain. There's old bunkers inside the mountain. There's a king's lift inside the mountain. And over time, people started to use that mountain for radical kind of backcountry skiing. But there's no way to get up there, so you have to walk up the mountain. You basically make one trip. You walk up and ski down. It's like an insanely beautiful mountain. We've been walking on the mountain before. Super kind of fantastic. And now they've asked us if we could intervene in terms of transitioning this to something that's open for everyone and demilitarize the mountain, and what that actually kind of means, which is a difficult task in and of itself. And what we did, which is not so much about design, and I kind of want to show just the slightness of moves that were kind of made, because it was about small iterations and small shifts, and not with some kind of dramatic kind of proposals of architecture. This is the whole mountain, where the top is obviously where you see on the top of the screen. And each one of these represents different things, both inside and outside the mountain, that we're operating with. So we made them a book. Actually, it's more, let's say, these are all the kind of parameters of each of the spaces that we had to work with. And on the bottom right are their kind of visions of how they want to do it. So that's the entry at the bottom of the mountain that you see there. It looks like that on the top right. They need more space for people to wait when it's pouring rain to get inside the mountain. As we move up the mountain, this is the bottom of the tunnel. Our project here is to upgrade the lighting. really simple. The tunnel looks like that. We said, don't change anything, just change the lighting. The next move, this is where you switch from a cable, from a rail to a cable. We said, don't do anything, just improve the lighting. Maybe clean the car. As you move up, project number D, coming up to the inside, we're deep inside the mountain now, at the top station, where they need to figure out how people can move through the space with all of their equipment. And we get into the tunnel. This tunnel brings you outside, and suddenly you shoot out onto the landscape, which is a kind of a beautiful moment where we kind of upgrade that to create an exhibition space, which now looks like this. There's this amazing lift, a kind of weird cable car when you go up this metal stair, and that's where the king could be brought to the top of the mountain. So once you got the king first up with the rail and then up with the cable car, then you brought the king up with this special little one-person car to the top of the mountain where he could kind of look out over his kingdom. We changed it into a bar, which is just finished construction, but I don't have pictures of it. This is the listening room. This is the room where the military sat and listened to American secrets. And there we're going into a deep dive now, and how they're going to be able to kind of transform that and still maintaining this kind of this cognizance to the history that was there. This is our next project, the listening room, which we just started to work on, which is just above the bar. This is the 1837 room, which I'm not going to tell you about. So this is just showing you, in a way, a process of working. The last project is when you emerge from the tunnel, they want to do a building. So finally, there is a building at the end of it. We don't know how the building's going to be, but we know that building is going to have an amphitheater in it. And the amphitheater is going to look a bit like this. If you can see it, if you can't, that's great. But this is how the building is developing now. On the right, so on the left is the tower. That's the radio tower. There's a small bunker, which you'll be able to stay as a shelter, which we'll renovate as a shelter, not as a hotel, but just as a shelter. And then down at the bottom is the amphitheater and the small assembly space. So, Ruten. This is a project that we just finished a year ago. Probably one of my favorite projects, not just because it's new, but because it cracks so many codes for us. I'm not sure why it's in the middle. I think it's really disruptive. We didn't agree. It's disruptive on many levels. There's a large parking lot in the middle of the city. The parking lot was, we were trying to get it decommissioned. It was a competition which we won. Then after we won it, all the developers in town kind of tried to team up to take it back because they wanted to commercialize that space. We fought for probably nearly 10 years to decommercialize that space, and that was really controversial. But we used a number of mechanisms that we don't normally use to do that. Number one, there's an interesting condition in Norway which is called the shadow kind of council. So the shadow council are under 18 kids who shadow the normal council, and they go sit in the council meetings, but they don't have a vote. We enlisted them. We enlisted them in terms of the importance of that public space and what it would do for them. And that was a kind of real game changer because we started with getting rid of the parking, reorganizing the bus, reorganizing all the traffic in the center of the city and saying you don't need a terminal in the middle of your city. That's why it took 10 years. Getting rid of that terminal meant we had to reroute all the traffic, which they said you can't do because you're not traffic engineers, back to range because we are traffic engineers, because we do understand humans, back to my introduction, and we looked at how we could reorganize this traffic that would be most beneficial for people and space. Then, the day that we submitted the project, the shopping mall owner who faces this gigantic parking lot put a model on the table in front of the government and said, we'll build it for free, let us keep the parking. and we'll build this building in the middle and keep the parking. And they said, okay, we're not going to take a vote now, we're going to go back and think about it. They went back and thought about it, and a month later said, that was crazy, we're definitely going to go with this project. We're going to get rid of all the parking, we're going to reorganize all the buses, and we're going to restructure the downtown of the city. It's now been nominated as the best city in the country, and they named it because of this project. So that in itself, and what is the most important thing in this project for me is that it's the first time where they have a space that brings together elderly, children, people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, homeless, and everyone is kind of welcome. There's drug addicts in the space, and that space has kind of created considerations. There's not furniture that kind of keeps people away. Every move in that space is about creating this duplicity and multiplicity of use, and that's what makes the space so popular, and that's what makes it so inhabited. This is under construction. The roof divides the space. The space is so large, it creates 4 different zones. You have zones on either side of the roof that are differentiated with landscape. You have the zones underneath the roof, and you have a zone that's kind of encapsulated in the middle that creates a public space. The orange is a skate park, which is also partly covered by the roof. The roof is moving as it gets narrower, it gets closer to the ground. As it gets taller, it gets wider to protect from the rain. It rains 285 days a year in this city, as you saw in the video as well. So this is one of the rare sunny days. Wooden structure, interesting, difficult, it seems easy, but you see the columns are on a grid, and that grid kind of reflects also a grid that goes within the landscape, and there's this juxtaposition of the freedom of the landscape and the grid of the structure of the trees and the grid of the structure of the columns. So I have a circular element on a Cartesian grid, gives you a number of interesting kind of anomalies which you don't actually recognize here, and that's kind of I think really part of the beauty of it. So just the organization of this project. Going in terms of green to the right and harder surfaces to the left, and these were some of the things about specific identities, flexibility, the connection between multiple modes of transport on the top left, the program with the shopping on the bottom, the train on the top, that green axis, etc. So these are some of the very simple studies that led to that. Programming under, lighting, water, green spaces, and this path that runs through the whole project. And these are the guys who are fighting for our project. And those are the reason that project got built. And that was a disruption in itself. So I'm really grateful to have had that opportunity. People with kids, people with strollers, and big people with strollers, and full kind of a spectrum of people that are all kind of connected in this space through a number of very specific targeted moves, landscape and architecture, and skateboarders, and very large people like trolls, which we have a lot of in Norway. All right, this is a big shift. I would say if that was my most important project, this is the second most important project for me. And this project is completely non-architectural, so you're going to have to dig in for it. The city of Louisville asked for a 25-year plan. There's a million cities in the world that have asked for 25-year plans. They've all had a similar kind of agenda. They're usually to brand it's usually for a government agency to kind of brand itself, meaning a mayor has a 4-year spectrum of time, and within that spectrum of time, he wants to show that he's built buildings. But the reality was that the city was catastrophic in terms of energy, climate, water, transportation, and a kind of declining population, or a stable but declining population. And none of their economic matrices worked, and we kind of knew that and kind of broke that down for them. We spent a year talking to the city. At the same time, the city was really dead set on making this kind of mark and doing architectural projects, which we managed to resist. This is how they make their money. And the first calculation I said, well, this is how you make your money, and we're able to kind of reverse engineer the numbers. That means your infrastructure of this rapidly sprawling city is declining every year. They go, yeah, it is. Like, you can't even keep up your signage maintenance with this income profile. They're like, yeah, you're right. So how do we generate change? We looked at education, we looked at growth, we looked at households, we looked at properties, we looked at traffic, the increase in traffic, and we also compared that to all the environmental indices that they needed to take into consideration, which they weren't doing. Just check out the energy consumption in. So, this is the state of affairs. 2 diagrams kind of tells you the whole project, and I can tell you how we solved it without showing you. It's actually a 600-page report. In 25 years, they have 0 mass transport on the agenda. They'll have 60,000 households, which is very small. They'll have 2 to 4 employers, which means they'll probably build 1 or 2 buildings. So the mayor was really disconcerted. He goes, you mean we only need 2 buildings in 25 years? Yeah, that's all you're going to need with this status quo. At the same time, 3 or 4 of your water systems will be completely overloaded. Your commercial traffic will double. And you'll have twice as many people over the age of 80, and 60% of your population will be retired. How are you going to address those things? And for them, they expected us to come, make a master plan, draw buildings, and we didn't, and that was so difficult for the mayor. We looked at all of the reports that had been done in the last 20 years and said, here's like a summary of the best practice. And we said, we need to reduce that best practice to what's the best practice for your city. And that was 7 different things. The 7 things were connectivity, creativity, economy, energy, health, living, and identity. So here comes the kind of, the short story of it. We asked difficult questions. We asked questions that we didn't know the answers to. We asked questions they didn't know the answers to. And we put them in a certain kind of situation which created an enormous amount of friction, but also curiosity. Then what we did is we empowered 7 business leaders, not ourselves, which is what you normally would do. So for instance, for transport, I took the CEO of Ford, kind of educated him, and he went out and did town hall meetings. So I did town hall meetings as a foreigner with no idea and kind of giving the critique, which of course got a lot of response. But now when I sent out these 7 business leaders, each representing one of these ideas, they came back with a massive amount of information. So when the CEO of Ford talks about traffic, people are listening. And each one of those individuals were kind of civic leaders. So we brought these civic leaders in, gave them teams, those teams went out, and what we managed to do, both with these civic leaders and with the platform that we set up, which included a downtown office where anyone could walk off the street in the center of the city, and provided people with information, is that we got 80,000 feedbacks, comments, etc., which is a lot. If the city is 800,000, we got 80,000. It means at least we're talking to a reasonable percentage of the city. But then what was really interesting is that we used modern day kind of information processing, broke down those 80,000 comments, and realized that they were saying, believe it or not, 30 things. Those 80,000 comments were essentially 30 things, and those 30 things I further broke down into 3 things. And those were values, assets, and goals. Roughly 10 values, 10 assets, and 10 goals. When we then kind of used that information and started building up a thesis around those 3 subjects, not projects, because the projects will come. When you understand your values, assets, and goals, the projects will come. The mayor couldn't handle that. He wanted projects. We didn't do that. But the values, assets, and goals, when I started to speak again publicly, everyone understood. Everyone was listening. It was their language. It was their vocabulary. It was coming from what I call not top down, not bottom up, but inside out. And that's where we build up our practice on this notion of inside out. How do you grow something from the inside and allow that to expand organically? And the interesting thing is that the project goes on. I haven't heard from them in 10 years. I don't think I ever will hear from them. They took it, ran with it, but rather than being a dust collector in the corner, it actually became an operative tool. And that's all I actually really wanted to create. These are some of the 80,000 comments. These are some of the comments from kids. I wish my neighborhood had a swimming pool. I wish my neighborhood had free stuff. I wish my neighbor had free stuff too. Actually, in Brooklyn, people leave stuff on the street all the time. It's like, I think it's free stuff. I'm never sure, but I'm on the grabbed a shelf just the other day. Free stuff. And this was another interesting kind of detail, is that, you know, we told them for this process to succeed, you need to set milestones. And I said, here are projects that you can do in 25 days. Here are things you can do in 25 weeks. Here are things you can do in 25 months. And here are things that you'll do in 25 years. And scaled it. An example, for example, if you see the orange there, cultural pass. Within the first 30 days, they gave all the kids in the city a free cultural pass that anyone could go into any museum for free, any kid. And that for me was a major, like, huge achievement, which is not architecture, back to range. It's what we can do. It's what we do. We can break those kind of barriers. And there were a lot of kids who didn't have access to that who now had access. They didn't have money to that, but they now had access. So how do we break those, you know, how do we break those barriers? So that's what this project did. We're working on, and been working on for 15 years, the central station of Oslo. Our projects are long and difficult with intention. I won't talk about the whole project, but just a couple of things about it. And it is also towards the disruptive side. On the right is the opera. Everyone knows and loves the opera. It has a roof. Kjetil Thorsen says culture is horizontal. So everyone walks on the roof, and it became the new public space in the city. The station is on the left there, just behind that yellow building. You can't really see it. Stations have this incredible, because of their logistics, they just tend to grow outwards. They can never grow inwards. They can never erase. They just kind of grow bigger and bigger until you have to demolish them, move it, and that rarely ever happens. So here we have a kind of very challenging situation to put 80,000 square meters, say 800,000 square feet, into the center of the city, and maintaining 50 million passengers a year moving through this central station. This is the original station, which I love. You walked in from the street, you walked into the space, you walked onto your train. Now you walk through a shopping mall, which is like most train stations, in order to get somewhere. So that proximity was gone. This is how the station started, is that small building on the top left. And this is how it grew. And this is the station in 2001. So you can see what I mean from the simplicity of it getting wrapped, and then that wrap kind of growing. The tunnel comes in the middle. After the tunnel, a new building on top of the tunnel. A new shopping mall is in the bottom center, and a new hotel on the bottom right. So we did one thing. This is the kind of condition existing on the left. This is the new condition on the right. This is how a station used to be on the left. This in the middle is how the station is today. That's what you have to penetrate in order to do what you want to do. And what we proposed to do was to cut a 300-meter long cut through the entire station as it was, create a public space by lifting a building above that space that would finance that space, but would give free space, outdoor space, accessible space, 24 hours a day space for anyone who wanted to walk through that station. A really hard idea for them to accept, with the exception that our project for this competition, it was a competition, was the smallest footprint with the greatest turnover, which they couldn't understand. They ran the numbers again and again. So there was business behind it. And I said we talked about it with, I think, a class, or some people earlier today, is that some of the ideas that we do that are particularly challenging, they're so deeply kind of back to specialist, so deeply kind of vetted that the more radical the idea is, the more mechanisms that we have, whether it be urban, economic, structural, environmental, systemic ideas that we kind of are able to break a building down into that give it an understandability and a viability that it otherwise wouldn't have. And so that layering that we're able to bring to it allows us to do things that are, frankly, pretty impossible. One other thing that was kind of really interesting is the city in Oslo, which I just want to go back. It's really interesting in the sense that the river, which I can't remember, I have a pointer here, you see just behind the opera is where the river is. It goes into a culvert and comes out just behind the opera. That's the division between west and east, between rich Oslo and not rich Oslo. And the premises of the brief were that everyone comes from the West. The West is the people that have money and use the train, and that's where the commercial and the shopping is. What we discovered was that the majority of population now, over the years, were actually living in the East and the North. And our cut through that station facilitated that. It was a very intentional move to facilitate the movements that we knew the direction of the city were going, that was going to create a greater connection and equity between these two sides of the city that historically have been extremely polarized. Sorry. So this is how the station looks today. Two giant bridges. That means there's no people walking on the street, as you can see. A giant roundabout. This is coming in, that entry. Really beautiful space. 1970s, 80s, 90s architecture. It just gets better the deeper you go with shopping on the side. So, project number one is the bridge, which is kind of built around this idea. The structure is parametrically modeled because there's so much stuff happening underground. There are train tunnels, there's distribution. So each one of those columns is placed exactly the only place it can be placed with slight kind of adjustments, which means every single arch is kind of individual and unique, something that we can do today that we couldn't do before. Each curve is different than the other. Each foot is landing in a different position, but it creates a very beautiful space. So this is a 300-meter long section where the opera is on the right and those bridges are on the left. As you move through, there's a high-rise building that's planned, which is now, so the interesting thing that's happened is this. We're not going to build the station. I don't think we'll build it. But what they will do is they'll take every idea that we gave them, and now they're slowly giving them to other architects. So they said, this is more like a master plan to us. So the tower is being built by someone else. It is, Karl Johan is the main street through the center of the city. The castle is on the left. The mountain is on the right. In the city, there's this beautiful mountain. And the tower is split into two. It's placed in such a position where the old airport train was, and the airport train is no longer in use because everyone just scans their phone and goes on the train. So this idea of having a terminal was kind of irrelevant. So we took it away and created this building. So now you see the culmination of the towers with a partial part of the axis. Again, a model by Vincent de Rijk. Shout out to Vincent. Access to the roof via the facade. For all the architects who know how to understand and read this, coming from the street side, walking through the model, looking towards the church, and a new building detached from the building, as opposed to how is it today, to create an upper public space that brings you directly into this axis. The opera is at my back now, as I'm moving towards the water. The tower is on the right. That's the new hotel to the right, the old station to the left. Three buildings, the tower, the main kind of station building, and to the left, a kind of mixed-use building. Shifting again down to wisdom and the humanity, we've in recent years been focused an enormous amount of our efforts on adaptive reuse. There's a site in the center of the city called New York. Interestingly enough, an old textile factory. There's that entire building where the circle is an existing textile factory. A really interesting situation happened when we did this adaptive reuse. We went to the Historic Preservation Society, and they said, you have to return the building to exactly how it was before the fire. We said, all right. Can you tell us how it was before the fire? We cannot tell you how it was before the fire. So you need to prove to us how it was before the fire and then return the building to how it was before the fire. That's what we did. This is obviously after the fire. The project is really, I mean, it's kind of an amazing client who brought together a number of small theater operators who all would sit together in an open space. This glass roof kind of facilitated have an open office kind of structure. On the right side, which you see outside of the picture, are artists in residence and a gallery space. The building remains rough and it's still kind of being used for those purposes. So art on the left, artists in residence in the middle, and the gallery space on the right. So this is the building that we met when we got there. The first thing that we did, a kind of phenomenally expensive move, was to take up that floor and build the possibility for energy through geothermals next to the water and using the water. This was the biggest expense of the entire building. After that, we only had money for white paint, but it meant that we had essentially free energy for the whole building. The glass roof on the left allows daylight to come through the center of the building and give light to the offices, which are rather deep on both sides. The gallery space is on the right, the artist in residence is in the middle. And also progression from bottom to top, from dark spaces, sound, and cinemas. So these guys are doing Hollywood editing. They need an incredible degree of high performance in terms of, you can't jump and down. You should be able to jump up and down and scream on the floor, and someone can edit a film, and they're doing a lot of film editing inside. So this is the space in the middle with a stair from a local producer who's just 100 meters away, who did the steel work, who we befriended. They got them to build this beautiful stair for us. It's one of the sound rooms, moving up through the building. The walls are simply washed and left. The bricks were kind of washed with a special, don't even know what it's called in English, to retain the bricks in their kind of original condition. As you see here on the left, really beautiful. Screed on the floors, denison on the stairs, steel that integrates the handrail. The wood box that you see in the middle is where the sound rooms are. Those walls are about 60 centimeters thick. And both the undulation of the wall and the gaps in between are facilitating the sound. Not facilitating the sound, but kind of keeping the acoustic properties inside and out. Moving up to the office spaces, there's this green wall that goes down from a social space below. Meeting rooms. I'm obsessive about liberating facades from having, so all these floors were kind of cut to keep the windows free from being cut by floor slabs. That's the social space, which is now a giant dining table where people sit and hot desk. So, just a few images from the gallery. I wasn't joking. We did two things. After we built that massive basement, we built a stair. That stair became a different type of artist space where they use for lectures, they use it for exhibition, they use it as they also use the underside of it as a library. So it became this device that started to break up what a traditional gallery space could be, both kind of performative, people use it for working, and otherwise a lot of white paint, as you can see there. A stair, some beautiful detailing you see on the left, kind of feathering off to the left, and a lot of white paint. And the library, and a speaker, and a band, and thinkers, and a stair. So that's how it looks on the outside. All right, we're almost there, I think. Akabriga, adaptive reuse project in the center of Oslo. It's a culture. It is a historically it was where the old shipbuilding was done. And it's kind of interesting that we always think of, and we talked about in studio today, that the shipbuilding and different types of industry are always kind of wet and kind of rugged, but they actually were building some of the most kind of precise machines of their day in these spaces. And we said that precision, rather than this glorification of the industrial, which we always do, it always ends up looking like some weird version of the Matrix, and everything is kind of, you know, we didn't see the correlation to doing that. The other thing was that in the 80s, what they also did in the US, and take, for example, Inner Harbor in Baltimore, you kind of changed all these areas into commercial areas. Well, someone did that here as well. A very famous Norwegian architect, whose name I won't say, who developed this whole area and turned all these industrial, and he did two things. He turned the industrial buildings into shopping centers and then built a bunch of new buildings and tried to imitate old industrial buildings. And that combination was just a travesty. He doesn't speak to me anymore, by the way. We did a couple of really important moves. So the most important thing about this project, this is how it used to be. This is the old wharf, it's called. This is the building. This is one of the buildings. It's this entire development here, but the first two buildings is about 600,000 square feet, a really huge commission for us to do. This is, let's say, how it was kind of found afterwards. This is where they were building these motors. This is when it was in its heyday, as you can see, actually a pretty pristine and precise. And this is what he did. This is kind of this is the joy of the 80s. So I just want to be clear that this space became this space. This is what I was confronted with, and this is why he doesn't speak to me anymore. So what I did was essentially 5 kind of moves. I won't go into all those moves, but number one, when the CEO from this company came to me and showed me the first thing I asked him for, which he was kind of shocked, I said, let me see your financial numbers. He's like, well, why? I said, well, I just need to see where the money's coming, where the money's going. And he's like, okay, show me the numbers. And I said, well, it's pretty clear. The second and third floor shopping mall suck, so we're going to get rid of it, and I'm going to kind of convert that into office space. And he's like, but we're a shopping mall developer. And I said, well, listen, we're going to redesign the ground floor, compress all that shopping onto one floor. You're going to lose 30% of your shopping, but you'll make that money back when you rotate the offices in the building above. So 2/3 of the shops weren't making money. The building was 60% full. Move number 1, compression. Move number 2, inversion. That means the shopping mall is based on everything looking inside. We opened everything up and turned it to the outside. The historic planners were super happy. They had no problems with it. Everyone said they're never going to let you do it. We did it. We turned it outside. There were these giant, fantastic windows that you saw in the earlier picture of this building. All those windows that you see on the side, which have since been covered up, which have since had fake kind of balconies put on the outside. We opened all of those up. We opened up the entire building. We demolished. So, oh yeah, this was his financial numbers. As you understand, pink and red are not great. So even on the ground floor, and this is the labyrinth that we were kind of confronted with as well. And that labyrinth became incredibly simplified. So 1, compression. 2, inversion. 3, clean cut. The clean cut was a street that went, a semi-climatized street that went from the bottom right to the top left to a large public space. We cut through that. Whatever we hit, columns landed where they landed, elevators landed where they landed, but it was this clean cut. It became a public street. The same paving outside, inside, that ran through all of it. Fourth thing was to activate the side streets, since the side streets had historically been connected by, that's the clean cut you see moving through. The side streets, as you see those red bars going horizontal there, were connected by bridges. It's a shopping mall. You want people to go inside, go up, connect to the other building, continue to shop. Day 1, before I started the project, I said, before I start the project, you have to delete those bridges. So we deleted the bridges, now empty the buildings, and he emptied the buildings. And then the inversion meant that there was activity on the side streets. The inversion also meant that we could take those cores, which I still don't understand why I don't have a pointer, to take those cores, which you'll see, for instance, in the center building, which are on the 4 corners, and rather than those cores opening themselves to the shopping mall, they open themselves to the side street, which means every business that's up in the building now has an address, which they never had before. Before you went to a shopping mall, you kind of tried to find your way into a side lobby and then make your way up into the building. So that was the 4th move, I think it was. This is our model. All these elements, it's one of my favorite pictures. That's everything we deleted. We said, when you start with the building, we're going to return it. We're going to get rid of all the shit that he put on the outside of the building and return it to that gloriful building that we saw in the beginning. All these kind of fake, like all these coverings, all those fake balconies that actually aren't accessible, there as well that you see. Then there's the bridge, the beautiful bridge you see on the second image on the right, from the bottom. This is how it looked. That's what we kind of started with. That's another bridge looking towards the water. You can see the facades. That was the fifth move. The fifth move was we got rid of all the traffic. We said every single space needs to be shared space. There's going to be no more asphalt. There's going to be no more curbs. Anyone who's delivering has to come morning or night or underground, or they just have to be damn careful because pedestrians are prioritized. So this is the same street here and here. We kept the building on the left. We changed its facade. Its facade was completely outdated and an environmental kind of disaster. We took all that stuff off of the facade, if you can see it on the right, and that's where we ended up now. That's the clean cut. We designed all the patterns of all the paving to create some sort of intuition, both in terms of tactility, density related to inside-outside. Then all the atriums we designed. This is standing inside of an atrium, so the color of the floor changes when you cross an atrium. The atrium is kind of tiled with penny round white and white stones. The roof is this kind of aluminum fins. A big thing for them as well, as I said, again, back to the former project, I'm not going to have any floors cutting any facades. When they went to they took that box and said, how many floors can we put in here to maximize the square meters? We started by deleting. Everything that's yellow and orange there are all deleted in order to either open the facade and create double, triple height spaces and to give more air to the building, because we said the building is just too dense. So now he's losing 25% of his shopping and he's losing another 15% of square feet, which for him is kind of unthinkable. So that the entrances now look like this, where all those floors are kind of cut away. This is part of the clean cut, which is going outside and inside again. The waterfront, which has become ridiculously popular inside. We did not do that interior. Office spaces, again, as you see, retracting from all the facades. Retracting from all the facades. The corporate lobbies, as I discussed previously about the inversion of the cores, creating corporate streets and corporate lobbies, which we did design using water pressure formed steel from Germany. There's a very funny story about these streets. Here they are in Christmas time. We did not design the ornaments. So the funny thing about the streets is that the day the project opened, so two things are funny. Number one, the day before we started construction, the CEO flew to London and met the largest shopping mall developer in London. He came back and said, because his board was about to fire him, his board said, you're burning money too fast. We don't believe in the project. He went to London, and the London shopping mall developer looked at our project and said, you're making a big mistake. Rebuild those bridges and keep the shopping mall, but whatever you do, don't do their project. That was a tough message for us to get. I know the CEO really well. We had a couple bottles of wine, and he agreed that he was going to go forward with the project, even if it meant he was going to lose his job. The project, with 15% less area and 25% less shopping, or 30% less shopping, the first year had 35% more income. The rental for offices went from 60% to 98%. And they said the 2% were just spaces they couldn't rent because they were so kind of in the corner or too small or by no. So, and they've maintained a 98% rental rate since the day it opened. And so for me, I talk about economic indices because that's also part of the success, but the bigger part of the success was that one of those big successes, they called me the day it opened and they said, Gary, your project doesn't work. I'm like, well, what do you mean? They said, well, we just opened, and you told us these side streets were going to be full of people. It was going to be kind of an amazing, kind of, everyone's going to gravitate, and he goes, there's no one in the streets. So I'm sitting in their office, and I look out the window, and I kind of look down to the street, and I say, well, where's the furniture? And they're like, we should furnish it? I said, yeah, you should furnish it. And I said, I'm going to go back to my office, furnish it by tonight, and call me tomorrow. They call me tomorrow, they're like, it's amazing. there's just people everywhere, and they're sitting, and they're buying coffee, and they're spending money, and they're buying flowers, and the shops are suddenly, because all the shops that had the possibility of opening, because all those side streets, which I didn't tell, were all small shops, like flower shops and shoemakers and kind of, like dry cleaning that all these 3,000 businessmen who work there, this is the CBD of Oslo, use. So it's, for me, a cool project. I'm going to go quickly through this project. This is a project in Azerbaijan. Anna and I have an office, or had an office, or she had an office in Azerbaijan, and I worked for her at that office in Azerbaijan, and was basically headhunted to build a new architectural company. And that first project with architecture was making a market. In the center of the city, there's this kind of fantastic market, but like everywhere else in the world, the market is no longer, let's say, people go to the shop, people go to the big grocery store. To go to a market means you have to meet a lot of, it's like going to a market is like going to Trader Joe's. You get a lot of cool shit, but then you still have to go somewhere else to shop, right? When you go to the market, it's kind of the same, right? So you go there and they have all this great stuff, but then you still say, okay, wait, I still need milk, and I still need this, or still need that. And so people are just, and especially in this area, had two conditions. The big street that you see going up there, a number of high-rises, middle class, middle upper class started moving into these high-rises. But that back side, if you look at the difference between the right side and the left side is completely Rio, let's say. It's completely, and that's the side I fell in love with. That's the side that actually the market had its kind of name from. That's kind of this kind of incredibly small streets, incredible texture, music, food, flavors. And I said, well, the market is always supposed to kind of mediate between those two conditions. They were not interested in that idea. We went and looked at the history of the market and how it grew from left to right. Here we are in 2008, and how the city is densified around it, with that neighborhood always being there from kind of even pre-Soviet times. Here's how the market looks inside. It's this incredible, just lush, vibrant, colorful, obviously super cheap construction, which we wanted to kind of keep that atmosphere. So one of the deals was that everyone who was working in the market, we're all going to keep working in the market after the project was built. And we would look for ways to build the project so that there would be no displacement. That was important for us. This is the circulation diagram in the market, which has like I don't even remember now the height difference. I want to say it's 17 meters from one corner to the next, which is kind of like, so from the top left corner to the bottom. So the whole thing is stepping down this very steep landscape, which made the project even more challenging. This is how the market looks inside. Sometimes it looks like someone's living room. Sometimes it looks like other people's living room. And some of the colors and textures and foods that they're serving there. And so we did this kind of, everyone's saying, why are you spending all this time? Why are you doing all this research? It's the same research we do for competitions. We broke down kind of some of the more important, the Aleppo market. We looked at Bursa, which is a kind of a large bazaar, and we broke them down into kind of typologies of space inside the market, inside, outside, kind of linear. But I was mostly kind of focused on the public spaces that they created. Sometimes you have a courtyard with shops facing in. Sometimes you have a quiet courtyard. Each one having a different typology, and we started to break down those typologies, and we reinserted those typologies into the Teze market in order to facilitate free space. We wanted to make free space. In fact, we made a diagram that said, as long as you build a diagram, whatever you do in the rest of the space, we don't care. We just want that diagram because we want there to be this free space inside. And that space to be diversified. So there's the breakdown that we made. How you access. Is it a single point? Is it all around the edge? Is it from the middle and out? Is it two-sided? We broke all those down that you see on the left. We sorted them, and we reinserted them into that space. Really simple, strategic diagram. Here you see the 6 typologies that we used from historic markets, and then kind of simplified, adjusted, and reinserted. So that was our plan. From that plan, we generated circulation. From that plan, we started to see how we move people. And that plan developed to this plan. where on the right you see those public spaces. And that's the diagram that we became incredibly fascinated by. These are the plans, the section as you're moving down. As I said, you see you're moving down like 3 stories through the building. We also looked at the materiality, and we started to look at developments and ways to innovate on some of the techniques of materiality to create both in terms of the natural wind flows, in terms of the cooling properties, but also in terms of the thinness and the materiality. So we have, examples where we're using these kind of limestone blocks with metal rods through them to create a very thin but very strong structural skin. So translating that. So I think this is the first rendering you've seen. I apologize for that. I don't ever show renderings, but I had no choice in this case. The roof is really beautiful, and I want to talk briefly about the roof, especially when you see on the right, not so much the one in the middle. The one in the middle is a kind of Norwegian fetish. The one on the right is made together with AKT, and what I like about it is, again, its hybridity. It's a combination of steel and wooden structural members with structural plywood. So a hybrid of those 3 conditions. Steel structures, wooden structures, and plywood that's acting structurally with this cladding. And those openings then are oriented, related to wind. Again, we wanted to make the building open and porous in every way possible. Here are some of the facade experiments that we did in developing it. That was an existing building on the left that we were tying into. And you get this kind of condition, different things with the bricks, and the roofs, which are open. And these are some of the details then that we developed. And you see, for example, the detail explained on the left, looking at angle of incidence of light, sunlight, how deep does it need to be, how porous can we make it, or do we want to make it in terms of airflow. We started looking at the cuts in the roof. And here you see the structural system that I described. So steel ribs and primary joists in wood, steel ribs, secondary joists you see there in wood, and the first layer of plywood, rotated second layer of plywood, and then the roofing material, which gives us a roof structure like this. I have fantastic videos, which I'm not going to show you. The airflow. One thing I just want to say about energy, it's a market. Market produces an enormous amount of organic waste. We're collecting all that organic material, and that organic material gives us about 70% of our energy through anaerobic digestion. You see the airflow, water collection. These are ideas that they've never thought about, never heard of there. Some of the technologies, both the orientation of the roof, the natural ventilation of the roof, the collection of rainwater, the anaerobic digestion that you see there, the low impact toilets, and a lot of technology that kind of went into it, but still keeping it basically simply a roof, I'd say. All right, you guys almost made it. I think this might be the last thing, and it may be the one that people like the best because it's the most Norwegian. We were asked to make, how should I say, we have a client. She's kind of amazing visionary, just amazing because she trusts us, to build cabins. And I'm super critical of cabins. I love the mountains. My son was a professional skier. We were in the mountains every week, every weekend. So we have these cabins. And the thing with cabins is that, back to the discussion about property, which I introduced in the beginning, everything relates to back what I said in the beginning. Because of property values, you can only build McMansions now. So even when you go to the countryside, the property values are so high that in order for you to maximize your investment, you need to build a giant house. The original cabin was 50, 55, 60 square meters, so say 500 to 600 square feet. There's somewhere you go, you may have an outhouse, you may have internal water, you may not, but they were really kind of off the grid, low impact structures, which now have become second houses, which means it also creates a gap in terms of, who can have a cabin and who can't have a cabin. Me, I never had one in Norway. I went to the mountains every weekend, rented, because I couldn't afford it based on this divide. And you can imagine then that a lot of other people couldn't afford it as well. So it became this luxury item versus what it was intended, which was a way to get closer to nature. For me, that was really important. It looks simple, it's not simple. What's not simple about it, I mean, the structure is simple. It's 65 square meter cabins. You can sleep 7 people in it. They're super compact. They don't touch the ground. They're standing on metal rods that are drilled down to the stone and stands on a wooden frame, an exoskeleton. The parts are components. But what's also interesting is the zoning. The zoning is, which they'd never done in the city, so it took us years to do it. Again, back to architecture slow, was we didn't divide the site up into cake. Normally you divide the site up into cake. We said, no, every property owner owns the land above which they stand. But we gave them one caveat, and that was we inscribed a square in a circle. So inscribing a square in a circle means you could rotate your house within that, but that was the only place you could be. And that was placed according to the topography, which we went out and scanned. We scanned every contour in the topography. We marked every tree. We marked the health of every tree. Took away those trees. We didn't plan the houses before we took away those trees. And once we had taken them away, and this is not how it looks, it's much denser, in fact, then we inserted these cabins and these circles. So that regulation, the city didn't know how to regulate it. The city said, it's not possible, you can't do it, we don't regulate like that. And then we understood why. And it was really interesting, the reason, back to going deep. The reason was, in the city council, it's a small town, it's not a city, it's a small town, a village. The largest excavator is on the city council. And he understood from our project there would be literally no earth movement. So for him it would be no work. So he was blocking the project. So we had to prove exactly which machine, which angle, which approach, how we would deal with all the things to allow them. And finally, we made a kind of 100-page report where they said, well, they're kind of right. You could build like this here. And the city approved it. Not only did they approve it, they stopped an adjacent project and said, we want you to build like this. That, for me, is a kind of, that's where architecture gets really freaking interesting for me. Cabin looks like this. I'm not going to discuss so much about it, but it's, as I said, it is roughly a 6x6 kind of grid, retracting the second floor. The stairs move to the outside, so if it's raining or snowing, you have to go outside to go to the second floor. That's to save interior space, but also to give you the possibility of maybe having a guest staying autonomously on the second floor. And they're standing like this, and like I said, we kind of marked and located them in the landscape. Looks like that. And this is the last slide. We've been working on a book. I can't finish it. It is finished. It's been sent, and it's been looked at by publishers. The book is called Spaceman, man with a period at the end. Spaceman as a kind of explorer, but also as a type of kind of projective manifesto about what architecture can be. I'm not going to tell you so much about the book, because hopefully you can read it. I sent it to my best friend, who's an editor, and he said, no, I want to change the entire book. So we'll see. Thank you very, very, very much.